move on then to the next section of this essay by Feldman, Causes about the Evil of Death. The section is called Metaphysical and Axiological Assumptions. That may sound rather obscure, but I don't think it really is. The metaphysical assumption is about the coherence of talking about possible worlds, that is, of describing, of comparing, of investigating worlds other than our own, and that may sound metaphysical. I guess it is metaphysical. The other word, axiological, just has to do, I think literally, if we go back to the Greek, it means the study of worth or value. So axiological has to do with the basis for value claims, for saying that things are good or bad, better or worse, etc. So it really has to do with a strong element of morality or ethics, what is good and what is bad, and here what is good or bad for a person. So the metaphysical assumption about possible worlds, he's just trying to be careful here, because he will be talking about how people fare in different possible worlds, which just means really defending a very common practice, I think, that we all engage in, is that we all think about the way the world would be if certain things were different. We've all kind of thought about these things. What would America be like if John Kennedy hadn't been assassinated? Or what would America be like if the South had not lost the Civil War? This sort of alternate history things having to do with counterfactual conditionals, something that we've been introduced to already, and he wants to be very careful about just how far this talk of possible worlds goes. He talks in the beginning of the bottom, page 309, about a hypothetical person named Myron, who's a smoker. He's a smoker, and talking about a possible world in which Myron does not smoke. What does that mean? What are you really committed to when you say, well, there's a possible world in which you don't smoke? He's pretty careful to say what he doesn't mean by that. He says at the top, page 310, this may seem to commit me to the view that there are other worlds relevantly like our concrete world, and that in addition to being here in our concrete world, the actual concrete Myron, or perhaps a counterpart, is also located at these other places. That, it seems to me, would be strange. And wouldn't it be strange? Like a counter Myron, a counter Earth Myron, things like that. He's not committed to that. He says, in fact, however, hold no such view. When I ask you to consider some world in which Myron does not smoke, I'm just asking you to consider a huge proposition meaning a claim about reality, and huge because it would describe an entire world, an entire universe, that fully describes some total way the world might have been, and which entails the proposition that Myron exists but does not smoke. That is, we can describe possible worlds. That is, we can describe ways in which the world could be but isn't. And importantly, we can compare the way the world is, or at least the way that we believe it to be, our actual, real, concrete world, with those possible worlds. We can say, well, someone may make an argument that America would be a better place if John Kennedy hadn't been killed, and that is comparing our actual world of 2012 and America and what it's like with the way that we imagine or guess the way things would be different had Kennedy lived, something like that. That is, it's an actual comparison between the real world and a possible world. It seems to me that Feldman is just saying that it's legitimate to do that, and it seems to me that he's right. We're not committed to the idea that these possible worlds actually exist in some other dimension of reality or something like that, but just rather that it's coherent to talk about them. They're imaginary. They're not real, but that we can talk about them, and that we can make comparisons between them and between our own real world. The second assumption is axiological, having to do with value, and here I think it's quite an important move that he makes. He basically adopts what he takes to be Epicurus's axiology, which is a form of hedonism. he says at the bottom of 310, suppose that the very simplest form of hedonism, which literally means pleasurism, right? So hedone, the Greek word for pleasure. Suppose that the very simplest form of hedonism is true. According to this view, pleasure is intrinsically good, and pain is intrinsically bad. Nothing else has any basic intrinsic value. So that the value of somebody's life is entirely determined by the amounts of pain and the amounts of pleasure that they experience. Now, he's quick to say that he doesn't exactly believe this himself, but for the sake of argument, he adopts this axiology, and he says it's to show that a move like Nagel's, saying that to say that a bad thing happens, or that he says that death is bad in something like the way in which being the subject of nasty rumors is bad. That is, that one does not actually have to experience something directly in order for it to be bad. That is not the approach that Feldman is going to take. He's going to adopt what he takes to be Epicurus's axiology, which is a simple hedonism, which things are bad when bad things are things that directly happen to us. Good things are things that directly happen to us. One might say that they are experienced. They are always experienced goods and experienced bads. And this allows him, and this connects with the possible world thing, because if we say that goods and bads can be almost quantitatively determined like this, that is, that we can assign values, unit, number values to goods and bads according to the pleasures and pains and how long they last and how intense they are and things like that, that we can make pretty simple comparisons between possible worlds, between the way that people fare in one world and the way that they would fare in another world. He says the value then of a world, W, for a person, S, this is on top page 311, is determined in this way. Consider how much pleasure S enjoys throughout his lifetime at W, that is, in the W, in that world. Consider how much pain S suffers throughout his lifetime at W. Subtract the value of the latter from the value of the former, that is, subtract the pain from the pleasure, and the result is the value of W, value of that world, for S, for that particular person. So you can see that this sets up a certain, simple way for us to compare the way that people fare, the way that their welfare levels in possible worlds, in different possible worlds, by assigning a simple value to their welfare, by subtracting all their pains that they experience from all the pleasures that they experience and coming up with a number. Gives us a simple way to compare how well people's lives go in different worlds, simply by comparing that product, that is not a product of that sum, actually, of adding together positive pains and negative pleasures. So he says, it's important, I would say, top of 312, says, I want to show that even if we accept the Epicurean axiology, this way of measuring welfare, we can still reject the Epicurean conclusion about the evil of death. It's quite important. He says also, a second reason for assuming hedonism is strategic. The central intrinsic value-bearing properties associated with hedonisms are ones that a person can have at a time only if he is alive and conscious then. I want to show how death can be an evil for the deceased, even if this hedonistic axiology is assumed. And I assume what that means is even death, how we can say that death is a bad thing for someone, even if goods and bads, value-bearing properties are things that can only attach to experiences that someone has when they're alive. Just quite an interesting thing to admit that, and then to go on to argue that Epicurus is indeed wrong.